Whenever you're ready.
All right, and just I want to double check before I start that you will be serving as our staff person for the meeting, logistics.
That is correct.
Again, okay, good. Good evening. The Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, June 8th, 2022 is now called to order. Staff, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. We'll do a roll call. Commissioner Thomas.
Here.
Commissioner Tavana.
Here.
Commissioner Janoff.
Here.
Commissioner Clark.
Here.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Here.
Chair Hansen.
Here as well.
And let the record show that Commissioner Raspy is absent this evening.
All right, thank you for that, staff. And then I will leave it with you, staff, to cover the rules of decorum and civility for our public meetings.
The public is welcome to participate in the meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meeting is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. For the benefit of the entire community, the Town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the agenda. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at board, commission, or committee meetings. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at board, commission, or committee meetings. All public comments at the board, commission, or committee meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the chair may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the commissioners exiting the chamber or meeting room. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the commissioners would return to the chamber or meeting room and the chair would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a board, commission, or committee meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code, Section 403.
And thank you for that. And so we will move on to verbal communications. And on the subject of verbal communications, the Planning Commission, on behalf of the Town of Los Gatos and the Town Council, welcome public participation in our meetings. And that can take a couple of different forms. First is written communications, and written communications received through staff prior to our meeting are always welcome and helpful to this commission. And then there are actually two ways you can participate in verbal communications during the meeting. The first is going to be now, where you can speak on items that are not on the agenda. And then during the hearing on a specific item, you may speak on that item when I call that item on the agenda. So we do ask that if you want to speak in verbal communications, that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. And we would ask that you would state your name and address for the record. However, it is your choice. You can choose to speak anonymously. So with that in mind, we will have verbal communications now, which is speaking on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone that would like to speak in verbal communications?
If you'd like to speak on an item that's not on the agenda, please raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Okay, so then we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent calendar. And anyone from the public or the commission can choose to pull items on the consent calendar for hearing in the regular meeting. On tonight's consent calendar, we have one item, which is the minutes of our draft minutes of our May 25th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Does any member of the public or the commission wish to pull this item from the consent calendar? Okay, I don't see it. Okay, then are there any commissioners that have suggested changes to the minutes before we ask for a motion? I don't see any changes. Hands raised. So then I will ask for a motion to approve the consent calendar. Commissioner Tavana.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. And can I get a second? Commissioner Clark.
Second.
Thank you for that. And if there's no discussion on this, which I don't think there is, I will now call the question, and I will start with Commissioner Tavana.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that motion passes unanimously. And we will move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is our public hearings. And our public hearing for this evening is requesting approval of a mixed-use project with one dwelling unit in an existing commercial building with shared parking on property zoned C1, located at 465 North Santa Cruz Avenue, APN 410-16-004. Conditional use permit application U-22-001. Property owner Jamie Pfister. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly. And please correct me when you speak. Applicant Marcy McDonough, and our planner is Aaron Walters. And I understand Ms. Walters will be giving the staff report. But before we do that, I will ask if, what commissioners have disclosures, if any, to make. And if may I see a show of hands from commissioners that have been able to visit the subject property? Okay, very good. So I will turn it over to Ms. Walters for the staff report.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. The application before you tonight is a request for a conditional use permit to allow a mixed-use project within an existing 2,400 square foot commercial building located in the C1 zone. The applicant proposes to reconfigure the existing commercial building, where a portion of the building, about 1,900 square feet, would be office space, and the remaining 480 square feet would be a studio apartment located to the rear of the building. The footprint of the existing building is proposed not to increase. The applicant does propose exterior alterations to the elevations, but those will be reviewed through a future building permit. The mixed use project meets all zoning regulations if approved through the conditional use permit, with the exception of parking. So the focus is parking this evening, and the proposed project is on a site that does have existing non-conforming parking. And the applicant is requesting utilize 3 different sections of the town code to address the on-site parking deficiencies and site constraints. One is to ask for a reduction of the one residential guest parking space in the code. The Planning Commission is allowed to consider that, as well as a shared parking agreement where the office use and residential use would be parking at different prescribed times. And that is also included in the conditions of approval. And finally, the use of the section of the code which does recognize that the portion of this part of town traditionally does have non-conforming parking conditions. And so it allows a provision where the applicant can pay an in lieu parking fee for deficient spaces. With the proposed conditions this evening for this project, there would be 2 deficient parking spaces, and the applicant in their letter of justification has suggested that they would be willing to pay that. The applicant has provided the letter of justification and has also done neighborhood outreach, which can be found in Exhibit 5. Staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit, subject to the recommendations of approval. And this concludes staff's report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Ms. Walters. Do any planning commissioners have questions for staff at this time? Vice Chair Barnett.
Yeah, so I read the conditions, Ms. Walters, on page 25, number 22. It refers to whether there's going to be a review by the Development Review Committee. I'm not sure I'm interpreting it right, and I wonder if you could help me procedurally with that, what that is intended to mean.
That might be misprinted. Can you point me again to that condition?
It's condition 22 at the top of page 25.
Vice Chair, I can jump in. It does appear that that is language from a standard condition from our building department. And yes, that was an error that this review of this conditional use permit is being conducted by Planning Commission, not DRC.
Thank you.
Sure.
And that correction could be made as part of a motion if the Planning Commission chooses to approve the project.
Okay, thank you for that, staff. And thank you for pointing that out, Vice Chair Barnett. Do other commissioners have questions for staff? I did want to ask staff one question, and that is why this needs to be a commercial, conditional use permit, because it is in a neighborhood commercial zone, and my understanding is that normally mixed use is permitted. So if staff could just talk about why we're seeing this as a conditional use permit.
Yes, so this zone is C1, and in the conditional use table, it does require a conditional use permit to do mixed use. So that's why you're seeing it this evening.
Okay. And with the advent of the potential approval of the draft general plan 2040, would that scenario potentially change?
Thank you, Chair. I'll jump in on that. I would say that that is a change that could be considered. So this is something that is treated differently in the zoning code between the downtown zone, the C2 zone, and this property is in the C1 zone, the neighborhood commercial. And so mixed use is allowed in both commercial zones, but when the zoning code implements the general plan, it does so in slightly different ways in the different zoning designations. And so as the code currently stands in the downtown C2, a single residential unit or two residential units could be done as part of a conditional use, or could be done as part of a allowed use rather than requiring a conditional use permit. But in our other zones, our other commercial zones, it requires a conditional use permit process.
Okay, thank you for that. I just wanted to kind of understand like the now versus the potential future, because ideally we wouldn't have to ask people to do a conditional use permit to do a mixed use in the future.
Correct. And when the general plan has been approved by town council, we will then be returning to Planning Commission with code amendments to implement the general plan, to make the changes needed to make sure that the two documents are consistent. And that is one of the modifications that could be considered at that time.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Summer. So then if there are no other questions from commissioners at this time, you will have, of course, have a question to time to ask additional questions after the public hearing portion of this hearing. And I will turn it over to the applicant who has up to 5 minutes to address the commission on this application.
And if whoever is interested in speaking on behalf of the applicant, you can go ahead and raise your hand. Anyone who does wish to speak, it'd be a combined 5 minutes. I see. All right. I will go ahead and allow you to talk. Dan and Jamie, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we
Perfect.
can.
Yeah, so we probably won't take up a lot of time, but we just want to start off by thanking you guys for your time and just want to say how grateful we are to have this opportunity. We both fell in love with this dilapidated building when we first saw it, and we just thought it was a great opportunity to make, Los Gatos even better. We don't think much has been done since it was built in the 50s, and Los Gatos has been our home with our business for about 10 years now. And it's just nice to grow some roots. And I think we're just really excited about the opportunity of making this something that Los Gatos can be and the residents be proud of.
Yeah, we've been renting for about 10 years in Los Gatos, and it's nice to finally purchase something and really just deepen those roots, like Dan was saying. We're excited to make it pretty and make it a little bit more useful as well.
Okay, and is there anything else, or did you want anyone else to speak on behalf of your application?
I don't think so.
If our architect would like to speak, she's more than welcome to, Marcy.
I can see if any of the commissioners have questions, but if your architect wants to go ahead and speak, that's fine as well.
All right, they are available to speak now.
Hi, I'm Marcy McDonough. I'm the architect, and I think there's not a whole lot to say. I think the drawings speak for themselves, and we're just excited about adding more housing. We all know how badly we need it, and every little bit counts, I think. So I think that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm going to now ask commissioners if you have any questions for the applicant. Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes, the proposed shared parking arrangement will require cooperation between the rental unit and the commercial use. And I was wondering if you had any comments about how that will work out in practical terms. For example, making sure that the commercial spaces are available after 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We, as a real estate company, we really work out in the field quite a bit, honestly. But our office hours are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's the office hours. After that, we're out in the field mostly, and there's really just, we're a boutique office, so there's not 50 of us. There's only 4 of us. So it wouldn't impact the tenant in the rental unit at all. We definitely, we would
respect that.
We would be respecting that, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does that answer your question, Vice Chair Barnett?
I still have a question because the proposed agreement calls for 9 to 5 rather than 8 to 5.
Well, I mean, I don't think we've ever been in the office at 8.
I don't think we've ever been in the office at 8. Yeah, so it can be 9 to 5. I mean, title companies and lenders don't work before pretty much 10, so.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I had a follow-up question to Vice Chair Barnett's question, which is regarding the shared parking agreement. Given that some employees are still working from home, how you would, if turned out that your tenant was one of those ones that is working from home several days a week, how you would resolve that via the shared parking agreement?
Yeah, I can take that one. So it's pretty straightforward. The way that the parking lot is set up, the back is an area that we wouldn't utilize anyway. And
not much. I
mean, I don't see us doing that, and it's pretty rare that even our agents come into the office anymore. So we've talked about it in great length, and I mean that area is going to be for them. We don't feel any stress as far as the parking situation.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, a lot of people work from home, and so do we. We can work from pretty much anywhere, and most of our agents also work from home as well. They take their laptops home, they show properties, they do listing appointments.
Yeah.
They're not in the office that much.
Yeah, about the only time we really meet with clients is on the initial consultation, but
yeah, we normally meet them out in the field.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it sounds like you've given it a lot of thought, so I thank you for that. Do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? I don't see anyone that has questions. So then we can go to the public comments section of the hearing and see if there's any one from the public that would like to speak on this application.
If anyone who is not on the applicant's team would like to speak, please raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Okay, very good. So then our procedure is to actually go back to the applicant, and you have up to an additional 3 minutes to speak to the commission should you choose to do so. So I will offer you that opportunity at this time if you wish to speak to the commission any more in this application.
No, I just want to thank you guys for all your time, and we're excited.
Yeah, we're very excited. We can't wait.
Okay. And then I will ask the commission one last time if you have any questions for the applicant. Now would be the time before I close the public hearing. Okay, I don't see anyone with their hands up, so I will close the public hearing and go back to the commission and see if the commissioners have questions for staff, comments on the application, or if you feel prepared to make a motion. So we can start with questions or comments. Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. This is kind of an exciting project, although it's small scale. It's the kind of project the General Plan Advisory Committee and the Housing Element Advisory Board is sort of looking for. And if we do one at a time, it's going to take us a while to get to our objectives, but it's exciting to see this kind of transformation. So I'm in favor of it. Another thing I'd like to point out is the size of the unit at 486 square feet may seem alarmingly small to many residents in Los Gatos, but I would like to say I endorse that size. I think it's an ample size for a starting out individual or even a couple. I've said before that my daughter and son just had a baby and they were in less than 500 square feet in San Francisco for more than almost a year. So it's doable and it's a very livable space. So I applaud the idea. I like the idea that the applicant is bringing beautification to that area of town. It's a little eclectic, but not necessarily on a visually impactful way. I mean, positively impactful way. So I think this is an exciting project, even if it's small. The other comment I would make with regard to parking is it seems to me, and this is really more a comment to staff for consideration, but the points that were brought up with regard to working from home are really important. And it seems that certain business models have different parking needs at this time. And from what we're hearing in the news and studies with regard to working from home indicates that this is a trend that's going to continue. So it seems like this is a small office that feels overparked when I look at what's going on and listen to the applicants and how this particular business works. So I just leave that out there as a comment that I think it'd be worth at some point looking at the parking requirements more differentially so that we are acknowledging businesses that are retail versus businesses that aren't, and really take the time to dive into the specific needs. I think it's possible that we may want to change the conditions of approval to give the tenant 24-hour access 5 days a week. And that's what the applicant is indicating they are assuming. But if the tenant winds up being a work from home individual, where are they going to go between 9 and 5? So I'll put that out there for discussion.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Janoff. And I will go to Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Janoff's last comment. I do, and I also do want to reiterate what she just stated about the fact that different types of businesses and different properties really should require different parking minimums. And I know that parking minimums are a huge, sometimes a major deterrence when it comes to redevelopment, especially for housing. And I think that this is a really great example of, I know that it's only one unit, but one unit that is in a very walkable place. It's right across the street from a grocery store. There's a pharmacy right there. You can get downtown. It is an ideal location for someone that cannot drive or doesn't need a car if they do work from home. So I feel very comfortable making the findings that staff wrote and for granting less visitor parking and for the granting a shared parking agreement. And I think that I really appreciate the packet that staff put together. I know that we don't see conditional use permits as much as we do some other things on our agenda. So I found it very helpful. And I also think that the applicant did a really great job of explaining tonight and also in the letter about how they plan to deal with the situation. And yeah, I just agree with Commissioner Janoff that I think that as a town, we need to, with all of our changes to our zoning and everything that's going to be coming with the new general plan update that is happening, I think that it's really important that we're like very forward thinking as a town about how we establish parking minimums and what that actually looks like. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Thomas. I have a question for staff just to make sure that we're clear. So in order for the commission to, should the commission choose to approve this conditional use permit to satisfy the parking as it stands right now in our code, they would have to, there are three parts of this, if I understand it correctly. One is to lower the requirement for guest parking. Two is to have the shared parking agreement. And then three is to pay the parking in lieu fee as well. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that being said, I wanted to also comment that I like this application very much. Since I've been involved with the general plan and the housing element advisory board for the past several years. I think this is exactly the kind of thing that we'd like to see. And I agree with Commissioner Janoff and Commissioner Thomas that as a town, now that we're going to have an opportunity, assuming that the general plan is approved, to look at some changes to the zoning code, parking is something we should consider to encourage more mixed use. So let's see Commissioner Clark as well.
Thank you. I first just want to echo what my fellow commissioners have said. I completely agree. And I think so for the town code section for the parking in lieu fee, they easily meet the 1, 2, and 3 for no increase in floor area, no reduction in number of spaces provided for the use in the parking in lieu fee being paid. And then on page 15 for the conditional use permit findings, they just pass them with flying colors. And so I think it's a really strong application. I'm so excited to see a mixed use project, and I'm definitely in favor of the project.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Vice Chair Barnett.
I was wondering if the town attorney might be available to talk about this shared use agreement, shared parking arrangement.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Unfortunately, the town attorney is not available to join us this evening, but it is something that would be developed with the applicant as part of, or in as they are proceeding with their building permit. And so it would be a requirement prior to building permit issuance.
So I support the application. I just have some qualms because in my prior life as an attorney, I did see a problem between residential and commercial uses that had a shared parking arrangement. And I think we could make a recommendation to the town attorney to make sure that the interests of the residential resident would be protected.
That could be part of the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Janoff.
Just to follow up on Vice Chair Barnett's comments, which I mentioned in my opening remarks. Question for staff: is it within the purview of the Planning Commission tonight to change the residential dwelling unit shared parking agreement hours to 24 hours? Well, yeah, 24 hours, 7 days a week.
I believe if you can make the findings associated where there wouldn't be overlap. So if the office was operating 24 hours a day and then you had the residential, there would be an overlap there. I think a remedy to that would be potentially asking for paying for those spaces in addition for the in lieu fee. So you could potentially have the office run as well as the residential run 24 hours a day, but you would just have the applicant pay additional fees into the in lieu parking. And please correct me if I'm wrong, staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Janoff. Ms. Walters is correct. The challenge with allocating the residential with a 24-hour access is that then you have one space that isn't shared. Then we potentially don't have enough parking spaces. One remedy to that would be paying an additional few $1,000s for one extra space, but that would be unique. We have, previously, I think it's prior to 2019, alternating use of parking, which is now shared parking, was done through a conditional use permit, but that was modified to push the deciding body down to actually myself. And so to make it easier for these kinds of instances, this is actually the first one. So we will be moving through that opportunity with the town attorney. I think ultimately, initially for sure, we've got the property owner who's going to be the tenant of the office space. They'll also be renting the studio out. So they're going to be fairly accommodating, I would believe, making sure that they're not impacting their tenants. But ultimately, I think if you want to go down that path, we can explore that. Unfortunately, the town attorney is out of town until the 20th, so that's why they're not available this evening. But we can explore those kinds of opportunities, and that could be direction that if that is a remedy, whether it's paying an additional $2,000 for the in lieu fee or some other mechanism that the town attorney deems appropriate, we can definitely explore that as we work through the shared parking agreement.
Thank you for that clarification. I personally would be in favor of, it's the applicant has clearly demonstrated and stated that they intend for those 2 rear parking spaces or 1, however many are back there, would be available to the tenant of the studio apartment. So we have that on good faith, but as the attorneys among the group understand, good faith doesn't always take you the distance when you have an issue. So I would be in favor of recommending that there be an additional in lieu to ensure that space is available to the tenant, but I'll defer to my fellow commissioners.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Janoff. Do commissioners have comments on Commissioner Janoff's suggestion? Commissioner Clark.
I just want to say that I agree.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to comment as well. As we all know, conditional use permits, which is what we're facing right now, do run with the land, and so I am concerned, as per the comments by our vice chair, and then thinking this thing through. We have a good faith agreement right now that seems to be on the table, but the written agreement will be saying something different. And so I do think we need to consider fixing this thing if it's not going to be too burdensome for the applicant. I mean, we of course want them to go through this thing, but it would be a very bad scenario to have the tenant not be able to be there if they have to work from home, because there are some people that do have to work from home. Ms. Armour.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to add one additional thought to this discussion, which is with the shared parking agreement, there is a statement of certain hours, including the entire weekend, that are reserved for the residential use. Whereas if they were to pay an in lieu fee instead of doing the parking agreement, then there aren't any specified hours that would be reserved either for residential or for the commercial use. And so if a different type of use came into that commercial, that could have some effect on the use of parking for the residential. So I would say that the discussion you're having could go either way, and so should be carefully considered.
Okay, question back to you, Ms. Armour, though, if the commercial use changes, would that not necessitate a new conditional use permit?
The conditional use permit requirement is because it is a mixed use. So it runs with the land as long as it is compliant with the conditional use permit. So it is commercial in a certain portion of the building as shown in the plans and residential in the other portion. Then it would be allowed. You could have a new business come into that space.
As long as it qualifies as commercials to meet the condition of being mixed use. Okay.
Correct. And we used office as the calculation for parking because that is the highest requirement for parking.
Okay. And if they were to pay the additional in lieu fee, what are we talking about? Is this going to be how much more than what they are already going to have to pay for the other space that they needed? Or 2 spaces, I think it was. So.
Based on the calculation, it would be making up the 1.5 spaces that would be required for the shared parking agreement. So it would be, our calculation would be, it would be another $2,000. So I'm sorry, another $4,000. So it'd be a total of $8,000.
Okay. I'd like to know what the commissioners think about that. Commissioner Tabana.
Thank you, Chair. I personally think it's a lot to ask of the applicant, especially considering that they worked so hard to put this together in front of us this evening, and they were okay with it as it was. So I would personally approve the project or the CUP as written with the hours stated for parking. That would be my preference.
Okay, no, thank you for your comments. Do other commissioners have comments on this issue? Let's see, Commissioner Janoff and then Vice Chair Barnett.
I'd like to defer to Vice Chair Barnett.
Go ahead.
Well, I personally would be in favor of a motion that directs the town attorney in drafting the shared parking arrangement or agreement to make sure that the rights of the resident tenant are adequately protected as far as can be reasonably accomplished under the terms of the contract. That might include attorney's fees, and arbitration could be considered, but so could a prohibition against arbitration, depending on your philosophy on that method of resolution. But I could hazard the motion after we hear from Commissioner Janoff.
Okay, thank you for that. Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, thank you. I guess after listening to staff, I would not be in favor of changing the shared parking agreement if that meant that anybody could park anywhere and nobody has any rights. I mean, the resident doesn't have any rights at all. So, I mean, over the commercial parking. So that doesn't make too much sense to me. I think the idea that Vice Chair Barnett is floating is an interesting one. So I'm in favor of supporting the agreement as is, as long as, and I don't want to hamstring this, like this is our first opportunity to see this sort of an application. So it's exciting. The applicant is doing the right thing and saying the right thing. And we're just understanding, I mean, we understand as a planning commission that it's not just what the current applicant is saying, it's what happens when the CUP is written and going forward. So, we just want to make sure that there's protection for the resident after this owner or tenant is moving on, and that's what I'm looking for, without constraining that parking space so that the resident has no rights more than the commercial tenant.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Janoff. Director Pelson.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's clear that the intent of the commission is to make sure that we're not impacting the residential parking. So I think that we can work with the town attorney, as Vice Chair Barnett talked about, to look for mechanisms to make sure that we ensure that one of those spaces is dedicated for residential. I think that direction is clear enough for us to work with the town attorney. I think there may be an avenue where rather than the additional 2 spaces, necessary. We're still doing a shared parking agreement. So ultimately, we might be able to get that to one, so it'd only be an additional $2,000 rather than $4,000. But we will explore all of those avenues if that's the direction the Planning Commission wants to go.
Okay, thank you for that, Director Paulson. Although I would add it was more than protecting the resident. It's also, we're not wanting the applicant to have to pay more. So I'm not sure how that gets resolved, but you know, we can go ahead with the motion. But I think if I heard the comments from the commission, I think it's both of those things. So maybe we should try and get a motion and see, and if staff has some thoughts about it not being viable to implement, then we could see where that goes. Commissioner Danoff.
Yeah, I can try a motion, but I would be hoping that Vice Chair Barnett would make any clarifications when it comes to the shared parking component. So
go ahead.
Having said that, I move to approve a mixed-use project with one dwelling unit in an existing commercial building with shared parking on property zoned C1, APN 410-16004, applicant Marcy McDonough. I can make the findings required for CEQA. I can make the required findings for conditional use permit. I can make the findings for granting less visitor parking. And I can make the required findings for granting a shared parking agreement with the exception that, or the clarification that we would like staff to take this to the town attorney to determine a way to create a shared parking agreement that doesn't penalize the applicant, but also protects the resident, penalize in terms of adding added fees. And these are the required findings in Exhibit 2, as well as the conditions of approval in Exhibit 3, modified to remove item 22. And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there a second for Commissioner Janoff's motion? Vice Chair Barnett.
I second the motion.
Very good. Are there any additional comments from commissioners before I call the question? Okay, I don't see any. So I will go ahead and call the question, and I will start with Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Tabana.
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So it passes unanimously. And I'd like to ask staff if there are any appeal rights for this action by the commission.
Thank you. The decision of the commission can be appealed to town council by any interested person as defined by Town Code Section 2910-020 within 10 days and on forms available online and fees paid. The final deadline is 4 p.m. on the 10th day.
Very good. All right. So then that concludes our public hearings. And so we will move on to other business, which will include the report from the Director of Community Development.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the Director, I want to share a few things with the Commission. First is that last night the Town Council did consider the recommendation from the HEB of the draft sites inventory, and they did accept that recommendation for the Housing Element Advisory Board work. In addition to that, we have some upcoming meetings, including the Housing Element Advisory Board's meeting on the 16th to begin discussion of policies for the update to the housing element. Town Council will be holding a special meeting on Monday, June 20th to consider the draft 2040 general plan and the final EIR. And Planning Commission will meet again on June 22nd, and we'll be considering the draft objective standards at that time. Those are available online through the town's website if anyone is interested in taking a look, and you can submit comments that would be included as part of that staff report packet and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And question for staff on the hearing on the general plan. Does council have additional dates set aside in case it takes longer than one meeting?
We do. We have a second special meeting tentatively scheduled for June 30th in case they do need more than the single special meeting to discuss. So if they need more time than the meeting on the 20th, then it would be continued to the 30th. So that is held for their discussion.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. So then the next thing is subcommittee reports and commission matters. Every member of the Planning Commission serves in the additional capacity on another town committee. And in our case of the Planning Commission, that includes this year, the Housing Element Advisory Board, which it includes all members of the General Plan Committee, which is where the Planning Commission seats is on the General Plan Committee. And then we also have the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee, and we have the Historic Preservation Committee. And so I'd like to ask if any of the commissioners have any reports from our subcommittees. I can say from the perspective of the Housing Element Advisory Board, we haven't met since our last meeting. And so we will be meeting next week. So were there any meetings of Historic Preservation or a committee or the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee since our last meeting? No. Okay. Are there any comments that commissioners would like to make during commission matters? Okay, it looks like we're all good. Okay, so then I'd like to thank all the commissioners for your participation and thoughtful comments. And we are going to adjourn for our next meeting, which will be until our next meeting, which is on June 22nd. This meeting is now adjourned.